would get calls towards the end of my coaching career where, I would I would have a guy call me up, and this happened numerous times, and he'd say, yeah, Coach Miletich, I need you to find me a place to live. I need you to find me a job. I need you to find me sponsors. I need you to do this. And I go, man, I don't know who you think you're talking to, brother, but I want you living in a one-room efficiency with an empty refrigerator and ready to train on Monday morning.
Guys, to another episode of Leadership and Character Development Show. And hey, be sure to like, subscribe, and share these videos so we can keep growing our platform, get more coaches and athletes becoming better leaders. Today, I got a really special guest, Pat Miletich, UFC Hall of Famer, one of the first pioneers of our sport, and started doing this. I got to know Pat through MMA, and I've trained with him at his gym, and he's,
he beat me up. He beat me up once too.
That's because you came up a weight class, Pat. Well, you were very gracious to invite me out to your gym and help me work on my game. And so, when you started doing that gym, I mean, what made you get that started? What made you want to be a coach and lead other athletes that were trying to pursue a path of mixed martial arts?
Well, it's really a long and winding road, Matt, and thank you for having me on. Number one, I was in college. I was going to a junior college, and I was out for wrestling, and thought I had it all figured out. And then my mom came down with heart problems. She had a heart attack when I was in 8th grade, and then had another heart attack when I was in school, and basically had to retire. And so she really didn't have enough retirement yet to pay her own bills. And my older siblings, my 3 brothers and my sister, all had families and lived in different places around the country. And so basically they all voted and told me I had to quit school and go home and help take care of mom. So I went home and was pouring concrete during the day and then bartending and bouncing at a couple different clubs at night. And it kind of just, it happened. My foreman on the concrete job was a black belt in karate and told me he could beat up any wrestler. And so we went out into the field one lunch period, and I took him down and kind of toyed with him a little bit. And then he invited me to go to the kickboxing gym that he was at. And it kind of started from there. But after being there for a long time, the traditional martial arts and the kickboxing and stuff, we trained hard for that type of training in that setting. But it wasn't wrestling mentality in that facility. And so, I decided to branch out on my own. I rented a racquetball court, actually, and put mats on the floor and on the wall, and people started coming, and that was kind of, I was very passionate about it. And, having grown up in Iowa, I read every Dan Gable book, watched every Dan Gable documentary, and just, I was possessed literally with the burning desire to be the best at something, and so, that's kind of how it went. And my coaching coincided with my competing for most of the time, because, well, I had to teach to make money, obviously, and I still wanted to, and I had to compete. So I was kind of like Paul Newman in Slapshot, to be honest with you. I was that playing coach, you know what I mean? But that's kind of how it all got started, and it just snowballed from there.
Well, I definitely know how that goes, because, when I was an Olympic athlete, I moved out to the University of Nebraska so I could coach and pay the bills. And out of that, I was able to develop a couple athletes that, both made national teams, world teams, Olympic teams, and became world medalists. And these were college guys that I worked with. And it sounds very similar. Like, you brought in guys like Tim Sylvia and Matt, and the names of guys that you brought in, that you probably just brought these guys in as students to become workout partners and / students, and develop these guys into world champions.
Yeah, and one of the first to come was Jens Pulver and Jeremy Horn. I had my core group of guys that were local here, but Jeremy Horn moved here from Omaha, Nebraska. Jens Pulver moved in, and then Matt Hughes and Tim Sylvia. we ended up, I think the total was, 95 athletes, televised athletes, and then a total of in different major organizations, UFC and Pride and a couple other organizations. I think we had 12 world champions. So it was fun. It was fun. I mean, it was very intense. Once the snowball got rolling, it was there. As you know, most people can't tolerate the work ethic that we had growing up wrestling, and so fighters would come from other gyms all over the world to train for their fights. And after about 3 days, they'd go, this is just, I don't think this is for me, man. I just don't think this is for me. You guys are nuts. And so the ones that stuck around, though, you've got no choice but to get tough. And the funny thing I tell people is my name was on the building and I got beat up every day. So.
Well, that means you're doing your job. You're training your athletes to become better than you were, and that's really what we're talking about is leadership on this show. And how did you balance that with your ego then? I mean, here's these guys that you've been training, and now they're starting to beat you in your own game.
I would go to sleep at night sometimes saying, man, there were days, of course, I did real well and days that I didn't do real well. But when you're dealing with guys like, Matt Hughes, who he's a blue chip athlete. He's a farm guy. He's strong as a bull. You're going to lose on days to guys like that. That's just the way it is. And you learn to be humble no matter what. And I think MMA in general makes you humble just because people are always going to have the chance to get the best of you on any given day. And that's the way it is. And so that the humbleness is, I can explain it in one moment. Was Matt Hughes beat the hell out of me one day. We were doing takedowns and he absolutely handed me my ass. And we were in the locker room and Matt Hughes said to me, we were sitting on the bench in the locker room after we showered. And Matt Hughes says to me, he goes, "You better keep looking over your shoulder, old man." This is when I had the UFC title. He said, "You better keep looking over your shoulder, old man, because I'm coming for you." And Robbie Lawler was sitting right behind him. And I said, "Yeah, well, while you're telling me to look over my shoulder, you might want to look over your shoulder." And he turned around and he looked, and Rob was sitting there and he started laughing and he goes, "All right, I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying." So that's, when you're around a bunch of hardcore alphas like that, you're going to learn to be humble.
Into mixed martial arts. I went out to Oregon and there was Dan and Randy, and I still remember the one time in my entire career that I tapped Randy Couture, and the move and everything but I wasn't fighting his weight class, and I wasn't fighting him, and it was a training environment where we were building each other up.
Yeah.
It sounds like everything you guys did was about, whoever was getting ready for the fight that's who we're going to build up, and that's who we're going to taper and prepare for competition.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, most people express their love by doing nice things for others. And in MMA and training with teammates, you show love by kicking their ass, right? By getting them better and teaching them. And that's so that they don't lose a fight, so that they can move on and win a world title and take care of their family and do all those things. So it's to most people, it's so foreign to think that we expressed our love by making each other tougher, but that's how we did it.
No, I totally get that philosophy, and yeah, if you're not pushing that partner or that that guy that you're training with every day, I mean, you're not giving him what he needs, and
right.
That's not you're not caring for him. You're not
right.
Preparing.
And it's
him,
like
about
when I was a little kid, I used to go to Iowa football games with my mom. She was an Iowa grad, and she bought season tickets to Iowa football because I loved football so much, right? And it was my sophomore year of high school, and we went into the field house. They had the wrestling mats out on the field house basketball courts for all the football fans to walk into the field house and watch the Iowa wrestlers practice. And I had gravitated over to Ed and Lou Bannock. and I was watching Ed and Lou work out with their brother Steve. Now, Steve ended up after that becoming a Special Forces Army Ranger, I believe. But Lou and Ed were beating the hell out of Steve. I mean, just pounding on him. And it was winter stays out. They were doing the winter rotation. And Steve was just getting trounced. And he finally started yelling at both of them. And he was calling them names and this and that. And Lou and Ed looked at him and both started yelling at him and said, quit being a pussy. Get out of here if you can't handle it. Go down to the other end of the mat where the little guys are. You might be able to take one of those guys down. And Steve stormed off. And at the time, I'm only a sophomore in high school. I'm going, man, these guys are brutal. But they were just making Steve tougher. That's all they were doing.
Pretty insightful. I think what you said, that's how you show your love in the sport. And, I think I was a D3 walk-on wrestler. So I took a lot of those beatings. Every now and then, maybe got to dish one out. But, one of the things that frustrated me a lot as an athlete was when people weren't bringing it. And because I never heard it said the way you said it, but I think that's what a lot of guys intrinsically know, and why it's frustrating if somebody's dogging it in practice is it's like, you're not bringing that love. You're not showing that you care for me. I want to get better too. Matt, I saw actually a clip of Chael telling a story yesterday online about you getting pissed off in a practice that people weren't were dogging it and you need him in the head, Smith or somebody, a shark bait, and because you were pissed, you're like, why won't you want to make us better? Why are you going to go easy?
Well, Chael has a tendency to over-exaggerate on those stories, but it was Scott the Hands of Stone Smith. You probably remember him.
Yeah.
He came up to Oregon, and it was Randy was traveling that day, and he invited Scott up, and he was coming back the next day, but we had a practice that afternoon, and so he came in, and I think all he thought I was going to do was take him down. And, he was prepared for the takedown. But, at that point in my career, I was like, okay, I'm pretty good at taking guys down. I think I want to work on my stand-up, especially when you bring an athlete into your room that's known for his stand-up.
Right.
I want to stand in front of this guy. It's practice. I need to work on my stand-up skills. So I just kind of stayed in the pocket and was boxing him. And then he'd start throwing some haymakers. And I was like, okay, well, he's going to throw those, I'll just keep stinging him with some jabs and stay in the pocket. And it was really frustrating him that I wouldn't take him down, and
yeah.
So he started throwing him a little harder. And I thought, if this son of a bitch throws one more like that, I'm going to light him up. That's just the way it is. And
right.
So, he threw one more and I already, it wasn't malicious. It was planned, Pat. And I think from the outside, even the guys in my training room, the guys that I work out with day in, day out, that know me well, were like, thought it was out of hand, out of control. But it was very controlled. It was very thought out. And I just started walking them down with what I used to call pressing punches, where, every punch is a straight. It's either a straight left or a straight right, because you're taking those steps on them. I ran across 2 full mats, into a corner, and then he cowered, and I just grabbed him by the back of the head and kneed him in the head, and he fell down. He just went fetal on me. And so I put my foot on his head, and just to say, hey, if this was pride, I could have stomped on your skull here. And so the kid left the next day. Randy gets back, and he was all like, what happened? He was mad, but I felt it was justified. You come into my room and you're throwing heat that had no intentions other than to damage me, and
right.
I just felt like that was the language I was using at that time. It wasn't I wasn't going to use my words. I was going to use, my fists and my knees to express that to him. But I do know that story that Chael talks, and he over exaggerates that just like he does everything else. But there is a time and a place where you have to send a very strong message to somebody that even in that environment,
Yeah.
I'm sure you've got into those situations where you've had to express that in your environment. Can you share one of those stories?
Well, just, I would say times where, fighters maybe weren't listening, or I wasn't training at the time. I was doing more coaching than anything else. And, I'd be having problems with certain guys or a group of guys. And so I would make sure I would run hard for a week and just make sure that I had the endurance to flex my muscle on people. And then on sparring night, I would announce every great once in a while where the room was getting too crowded with what I would call cannon fodder. They were fighters. They weren't there to win world titles. They were there to pick up girls in the bars, say that they were a fighter, that kind of stuff. And so basically I would announce at the beginning of practice, this is sink or swim night, time to thin the herd, which meant we're going hard. We're getting after it tonight in sparring. And, I would drop people, I would drop as many as I could. And I'd pick a way that I would drop people, whether it was low kicks, whether it was liver shots, stuff like that, and just go around the room and just start getting rid of people. And, then people would start listening again, they're like, okay, the old man still got it. He wasn't happy. And then they would start paying attention again, so it was just moments like that now and then. And I had a guy write me a letter, and we had a guy, actually, we were going to do, before the Tough show, we almost got a reality show launched, and it was with NBC of all places, way before Tough. And I sat in Kevin Riley, who was the president CEO of NBC at the time, for an hour and a half. The guy that got me the meeting said, you probably have 5 minutes with this guy. And we had an hour and a half meeting, and he was laughing his ass off. He loved the show concept. And so they sent out a guy who played linebacker for Penn State. I won't say his name. And his dad was a TV producer. And so they sent him out to do a week of training with us and film it, to kind of put together a sizzle reel. Well, after one day, the guy left, and nobody beat him up. We just did endurance drills. We did light sparring. We did a ton of grappling that day. And he just went into practices with us. And I said, don't hurt the guy, but, make him work, whatever. And he left literally a 5-page letter of how he stole his manhood. This guy's he started for Penn State at linebacker of all places, right? So the guy's a good athlete. He's a tough guy. But he left us a 5-page handwritten letter, taped it to the door of the gym, and we never saw him again. And I got a call from his dad on what an asshole, what an a-hole I was, and for what we did to his son. And I said, listen, man, this isn't football, brother. This is a whole different level. This is a whole different level over here, what we're doing. And I trained people that way only because I was a special guest at a kickboxing event in Chicago, south side of Chicago. And it was at the time I was UFC champion. And a kid that was out of shape, shouldn't have been in there, had horrible technique, dropped. He just collapsed in the ring, and he had a heart attack. And we didn't know it at the time, but his heart had blown up. And the ring doctor was downstairs taking care of somebody's broken nose in this old memorial auditorium. And so I recognized the kid was in trouble, jumped in, started trying to take a pulse. The referee didn't know what he was doing, tried to do chest compressions on him, and I pushed the referee away, and I said, you got to stop. Let me find if there's a pulse. And then 2 volunteer firemen jumped in, and we were giving him CPR, trying to save him, until the ambulance got there, and the kid passed away. And I never wanted to be the guy that had to tell somebody's parents or somebody's wife that he was permanently damaged or died because I didn't train him correctly. So I made sure to thin those people out, the people that did not absolutely belong. It was harsh, and it was harsh for a specific reason, because I never wanted those guys in the room if they didn't belong. And that's the thing is, generally those were the people with options in life. The guys that were in my room, a few of them had options, but a lot of them didn't. And that's why they were so tough and why they were so committed and so passionate to what they were doing, is that, you know, their refrigerator was going to be empty if they didn't win that fight. And that's the way they trained.
That is such a good point of being hungry, and I think that's what a lot of our athletes, you know, in today's culture are missing. Is it's so easy to be a champion on Xbox or Nintendo or something. You know, you can get that same feeling without actually really accomplishing anything. And guys that do have all these options, they could go out and make a lot of money in another career. You know, they don't have that same desire. You know, they're not
Right.
they're not hungry to compete, because the difference between, for me personally, the difference between, you know, me living in Colorado training at the Olympic Training Center meant that I had to be the number one guy in the nation, because if I wasn't, I didn't have enough money. And that's why ultimately I ended up moving out to Nebraska to coach, because that year in '96, I took third at our trials. And I wasn't making my full stipend that I was making, that was just enough to cover food and my rent. And
Yeah.
then to see, you know, these guys that they would say they want to do it, but they don't have that hunger, because it's not, they don't have to win. They got other options.
Yeah. Well, and there are exceptions to that. I mean, you know, when I look at, you know, guys who, you know, were able to finish college, you know, could have successful careers in other things, you know, a Daniel Cormier, Couture, you know, those types of guys who were Olympic level guys and medalists and things like that. You know, ultimately you guys did have options, but ultimately you guys were blue chippers. So you had the work ethic too. So it definitely made a difference. But for the average Joe, or even a guy who's a really good athlete but not quite world class, it's generally not going to cut it a lot of times.
So, Pat, what I've heard from you is two big points. You were saying be humble and be hungry. And we've talked a lot about that on the show and different episodes and stuff like that. And on this thing of being hungry, one of the things that we've talked a lot about offline and on different episodes was this idea that, and Matt, maybe it was with Lee, I think it could have been with Lee that we talked about it, but it was this idea that, like, a lot of guys, it's easy to get, what's the word? Self-pity, because what you know about are your injuries or your hardships in life, and you know you get daunted. You realize how hard this is, but you don't realize until you start surrounding yourself with other champions, listening to stories like yours, Pat, or Matt, and these other guys, and realize that those struggles are not something that's unique to you. It's something that a lot of these top guys, they all share. They've had something like that happen. They've gone hungry. They haven't been able to have food in the fridge. And, you know, once you realize that, then it's easy to kind of put that self-pity aside and realize, you know what, it's the end of the season. Everyone's banged up. Everyone's injured. You know, if my knee hurts, or I got a bad this or that, but that's actually normal for the course. Stop feeling sorry for yourself, because the other guys have it. They're just hiding it. They're hiding that injury, but everyone's got it. You know, what would you share, or what do you share to your younger guys or your blue chip guys who might, you know, see the television version of, like, the stars who have, you know, looks like they have resources and funding for training and eating really good nutrition, and thinking like, hey, you know, like, I don't have food in the fridge, or I can't do this because I don't have the resources we need. You know, I don't have the support that I think I deserve or I need, versus letting them know that, you know, that's a path that they're on, that all of you guys have walked beforehand and is normal for the process.
Well, I mean, I'm a big believer in incentives, right? Incentives being winning a fight means I make twice as much money. Winning a fight means I win the world title. Winning a fight means I can pay for my apartment or my house, take care of my kids, whatever their life experience is. And I can tell you that, you know, that has changed over time, and everything is cyclical in life and in history, right? Everything repeats itself. For whatever reason, humans don't learn from the past enough. But, you know, I would get calls towards the end of my coaching career where, you know, I would have a guy call me up, and this happened numerous times, and he'd say, yeah, Coach Miletich, I need you to find me a place to live. I need you to find me a job. I need you to find me sponsors. I need you to do this. And I go, man, I don't know who you think you're talking to, brother, but I want you living in a one-room efficiency with an empty refrigerator and ready to train on Monday morning. I'm not doing a thing for you except coaching you. That's all I'm doing. That's what I do. You can figure it out from there. That's self-sufficiency, brother, because that's the only way you're going to get by in this world. And so, that's the thing is we see it manifesting itself in the sport of MMA by numerous people constantly, even at the highest level, who can't even make weight. And Matt can attest to this, and you can attest to this because you wrestled. I started cutting weight in 6th grade. That's what, 12 years old, whatever, until I was 42 years old. I cut weight for 30 years in wrestling, kickboxing, boxing, and MMA. And not one time did I miss weight. Not one time. Now, granted, there were a couple ugly cuts, but I never missed weight because once I signed my name on that dotted line or committed to it, I'm going to make the weight and I'm going to show up and do my job, and making weight is part of the job. And so a lot of these, the concept nowadays of people just not holding themselves accountable allows them to just go, I couldn't make weight. I was having a tough time with this or whatever it is. My girlfriend and I were arguing, the airplane, we got stranded and it took an extra 10 hours to get there. Whatever the case, none of those excuses mattered. We always made weight. And so that's just the mentality that you've got to have. And so, yeah, the holding yourself accountable and incentives. You've got to give people incentives. I've always believed that in athletics. I've always believed that in life and in sports in general, even in business, right?
No, you're absolutely right. I've gotten those same calls.
Yeah.
You need to, and it's like, no, the perfect example was Evan Tanner. He said, I want to come out and train, and I don't know where I'm going to live. I don't know what I'm going to do. I said, you know what? We got a car lot in the back, and there's a camper trailer in the back. You can sleep in there until you figure it out. And then I had a guy like Nate Corey who, fought for a title once, and told me after that fight how I needed to hire a wrestling coach, a Muay Thai coach, and a boxing coach, and a strength coach. And I think he should have been asking for a psychological coach because that's what he actually needed. And he's like, and if you don't do this, I'm going to leave. And I was like, okay, we'll see you, man, because that's not what we do here. We create the environment and give you the opportunity, and you need to go out and figure out how you're going to get, if you need extra boxing or you need extra wrestling, you're welcome to go hire that coach through your purse money, but if you're not willing to invest in yourself, whether that's financially, whether that's time, energy, effort, it's kind of hard to put any investment in that guy, even as their coach. If you don't see them investing 100% into themselves, how is it your responsibility as the coach to do that? It's the opposite. It's a responsibility for you to tell them exactly what you told them.
Sure. And that's the thing is, and I would say it was always the guys who, very interesting moments where guys would pick up their bags, their equipment bags, who were there to train for a week or a month or whatever it was to try it out and see how it worked out. And practice just got too hard. I always kept the room as hot as I could at the old gym, especially 90, 95 degrees type stuff. And they just halfway through practice go over and pick up their bag like they were going to leave because they were so frustrated with what was going on. And everyone in the room would stop. And everyone would say, if you walk out that door with your bag, you're not coming back tomorrow, man. You're not coming back. So you make that decision right now, what you're going to do with the rest of your life and with your career. And it was a breaking moment. It was a make or break moment for a lot of those guys. Now, most of them walked out, but there were guys who set their bags back down. And I can tell you that a couple of those guys became world champions. At that moment, they decided to stick with it a little bit longer, and for people that think that, as you said, you see on TV, the glamour and all the other stuff. You didn't see every world champion I ever trained or every person that I ever trained who made it to televised careers and to the UFC. There were times they broke down and cried. They absolutely broke down and cried. Tim Sylvia broke down and cried almost every day. He got beat up by everyone in the gym, and he stuck with it though. And that's all it takes is hanging around people who are winners, who are used to winning, who have a winning mentality, and who don't give up, and follow that, right? And it's that saying is, if you hang out with 5 losers, you're going to become the 6th loser. You hang out with 5 millionaires long enough, you're going to become the 6th millionaire. And if you hang out with 5 world champions long enough, you're going to become the 6th world champion. And that's really what it comes down to, is you have to surround yourself. And my attorney said that at the very beginning of my career. He said, surround yourself with winners, man. Surround yourself with people. Doesn't matter whether it's athletes, businessmen, mentors, whoever it is, just surround yourself with winners. And eventually that just gets into your fiber because you're surrounding yourself with like-minded people. And that's really what it comes down to also.
One of the things I did about 10 years ago is I was training with Team Alpha Male. And at the time, this is 2011.
What is that? Misogynistic? Alpha male?
Yeah. Yeah, they got a lot of ladies in there who fight some tough fights too. But yeah, they but back then in 11, when Uriah and Joseph and Chad were kind of the stars, our basically JV at the time, we were extras in the shows they were putting on and stuff. Right. It was TJ and Darren Elkins and Josh Emmett, who just fought last week or so. And we were just starting out, and like, it's hungry, didn't have much, didn't have the money, and scraping it together, busting tables, whatever guys would do. And like you said, you see them take those steps now that are in the glamour that everybody sees stardom in. But I can promise you, those guys, they were grinding it out for a long time ahead of time. And what Matt said,
and taking beatings.
Yeah. And look where they are. It took that patience. They're looking for a year or 2 or whatever. It's been 10 years and they're finally getting their shot. It took a long time for it, especially in that room. The beatings at those weight classes, you're behind a lot of people. And what Matt said earlier really resonated, this idea of invest in yourself as a message to these younger guys. I'm a college professor as my day job, and I have a lot of students. They're in student debt. They're trying to work in my research laboratory. And I had a time where a guy couldn't come in to run a scientific experiment because he said it was raining out. And I said, well, what's the deal with the rain? He's like, well, I ride a motorcycle. I can't come in because I don't want to crash. It's dangerous. I don't want to be unsafe. And I said, well, you don't have a car? You don't have anything else? And he said, well, I could take my car, but I don't have a parking pass for it. And I said, well, it costs $6 for a visitor's pass for the day. Come in, you need to do your session. It's $6. And he had a really great story about how much I should feel bad for him because he doesn't have $6. He's like, I honestly, truly don't have $6. I don't have anything in my bank account. I can't use my debit card. And I said, look, you made a commitment to collect this data to run this experiment session today.
Right.
You don't have a neighbor you can borrow $6 from. You don't have a credit card. Borrow it from yourself. Borrow it from your parents. But like, borrow it from yourself. I said the best investment you'll ever make is in yourself. You're willing to spend, $20,000 in student debt to go to college, but you're not willing to invest $6 on your credit card to come and do what you need to do to create that next situation for yourself. You'll never make a better investment than in yourself. And do that before you invest in anybody else's business, anybody else's thing. And you're not spending money, you're investing it. And I mean, I think sometimes that message gets lost with younger people who just haven't had a chance to learn it.
Yeah, no, it's short-sighted, to not have those visions and stick with those visions. And it's important, I think, for for anybody in life, not just athletes, to write down goals. But you've got to in there, and I always had stuff stuck to my mirror with goals, weekly goals, monthly goals, yearly goals, all of those different things that were always on the mirror that I looked at every single morning. And you know, a lot of people don't understand that when you write down a goal, well, you've got to write down the stuff that happens in between now and that goal. And a lot of people don't understand that, right? Everybody wants to be a world champ. They just don't pay attention to the details and the getting up every morning at the same time and doing the same thing, and that routine of just, you know, losing is a routine, winning is a routine, right? And those patterns, unfortunately, they're an addiction. Bad patterns are an addiction. Good patterns are an addiction. So that's something that people have to remember.
One of the things that we were talking about before the show started, Matt and I, was this idea about mentoring athletes and, you know, seeing that growth process, because, you know, there's different kind of mentoring and coaching that's needed for developmental athletes versus blue chips, and everybody needs it. We all need it, peer mentoring and help from everyone and all the time. And I was curious to ask you, one of the things I wanted to see what your thoughts were, was how do you, first of all, I guess two questions. One, what kind of issues do you find affecting young guys who are trying to climb to that next level to be the best in the world? And two, how do you see, or what do you want to see in your athletes in them creating the mentoring relationship, like coming to you and or to someone else? What do you see as effective strategies for athletes to take in finding the mentoring relationships, finding the coaching relationships that they need to succeed?
Well, I can only relate to how I had to coach particular athletes, different personalities, different backgrounds. I've got to find out their background first to know how they tick. You know, in the fighting world, of course, a lot of them had rough childhoods, you know, things like that, anger issues, problems with authority, you know, a lot of that sort of stuff. So it just depended on the athlete, whether they were somebody who was motivated by being yelled at, whether they were somebody who was motivated by, you know, a hug, positive words, you know, things like that. So, you know, I mean, to give you a good example, Robbie Lawler was a guy who reminded me a lot of myself. He didn't have a great childhood, and he was a guy who had real serious problems with authority, people telling him what he had to do. And, you know, give you an example, we're sparring one day, and I was not sparring that particular day, and neither was Tim Sylvia, and Tim was in the gym watching, and Tim yelled at Robbie to keep his hands up. And Robbie dropped his hands down past his waist, looked at Tim, and just kept sparring with his hands down the rest of the round, just to spite Tim. And so next round comes along, and Robbie's sparring, and Tim yells at him again, "Robbie, keep your hands up." Robbie looks at him again, drops his hands down past his waist, and spars the rest of the round like that. And I said to Tim, I go, are you not understanding what he's telling you? He's telling you, number one, he has zero respect for what you're telling him to do. But two, you're going about it all the wrong way. And so Rob was the kind of guy where, I mean, I could tell most people, this is what we're going to work on today. This is what we're going to do. But with Robbie, I had to read him totally different. And I had to say to him, because he was very honest with himself, and he was a very smart guy, I could say to Rob, what do you think you need to work on most? Where do you think the holes are in your game? If I was game planning against you, or if you were game planning against yourself, where are the weak spots in your game? And he would rattle off a few things, and he would be spot on. And I'd say, sound good to work on those things today? And he'd say, yeah, that's what I want to work on. I'd say, awesome. So I let him do that, right? I allowed him plenty of space to not be cornered, to not be told what to do, because he's not gonna listen to me if I do that to him, right? So coaches have to learn to read people individually, and that's just the way it is. That's just the way it is. And my kid's swim coach, who was a former Navy SEAL, he was a guy that he learned over time, but being a Navy SEAL, it was you do it the Navy SEAL way or get out. And he didn't care if you were 7 years old or 17 years old. The pool windows shook when he yelled at the kids. There wasn't one mom on that swim team that didn't cry her eyes out because of the way he yelled at the kids, right? And that's just the way it was. And I had talks with my wife and others who were very upset with the way he coached. And I said, ultimately he's yelling because he cares. That's something we have to remember also, right? If he wasn't yelling, he just doesn't care. Okay, so that's the way he shows his love. The guy is very hardcore. He's an awesome guy. He's very dedicated to these children, and he loves them. But he's a Navy SEAL. He's seen a lot of combat. He doesn't play games, and he's just that was his style, and it chased some off, I think, deliberately, because he only wanted kids that were totally dedicated and families that were totally dedicated, and he would say that to people who would go to sign up for the team, and he'd go, listen, here's the way I am. If you don't like it, if you don't like what you're going to go through, then don't bring your kid here, because this is a coach-run team. This is not a parent-run team, and this is a club situation. I'm working for myself, right? This is my business. This isn't a high school swim team where you can go to the principal and complain about me. That's not the way this works around here. So it varies in coaching styles, but yet also from an athlete's perspective and from a parent's perspective, you have to understand why the coach is. Now, if there's a coach, to give you an idea of my kid's high school swim coach, he just yelled to yell. I could tell he just yelled to yell, and I had to talk to him a couple times and say, listen, man, these kids are not connected with you at all. Whether it's you're frustrated with what's going on in your life or at the school or with the principal or the academics that are in control of things, whatever it is, you're taking that out on the kids, and that's got to stop. So it's all about reading people. It's all about understanding, reading your coaches reading their athletes, and having honest conversations with each other about what they want out of it. And if you're an athlete who doesn't care more than your coach cares, you need to pick something else to do.
That's true. And I think what we were discussing was how do you get an athlete to tell you, like Robbie told you what he needed to work on, but you went up and asked him specifically. But how do we get athletes to understand that they need to talk to their coaches and tell them what's the best way to be coached? As a coach, you and I are asking them, or we're looking and saying, I'm figuring out how you like to be coached. You want to work on what you think you need to work on. You don't want to be told. But how do you get these guys to figure out how to go about that process? And it is about communication. It is about being honest. But is it something to do with intimidation, or is it they're fearful? But how do they get to that point where they, especially an elite athlete, where he's like, I know what works for me and I know how to be coached, but we all need to be coached. So how do I get that guy to make that jump?
Well, it can go for any, really. It can go for say a nose guard in football. Where are you always, write down where you're always getting beat, or pulling guards. You're not able to get into the backfield to disrupt a sweep or sprint out pass play. Where are your problems with getting past pass blocking? What techniques are really giving you problems? 2-on-1 situations, how to beat those, whatever. And as a wrestler, you got to say, how are you getting taken down? How are you getting turned? What is it a gut wrench that you're vulnerable to? What style, how come you're getting laced, and what are you doing wrong? And for MMA fighters, I would have to say, I want you to sit down, write a game plan to beat you. Write a game plan to beat you. And I want you to be totally honest. Who's the guy that's going to beat you? And then you've got to, based on the game plan, and that's what I always did for myself, I had to do a game plan for the strengths of my opponent, and then I would also have to do a game plan for them on what they were planning to do most likely to beat me and where my weaknesses were, right? And that's part of what an athlete has to do. And you can sit down with your athlete at that point and go over it and say, either it's spot on, or can I add something? Can I add something to that? And, and again, off reading an athlete's background, did they come from an abusive father? Did they, have any kind of problems like that when they were young? What's trust issues, trusting someone in authority, right? And forming some sort of that bond with them, that where you're not going to betray their trust. You're not going to flex your authority on them just to be an asshole, and that's where coaches have to be very humble also, and know when to back off the gas pedal on people and things like that, and give them a little bit of room to breathe and stuff like that, but once you get to that elite level, and when it's time to train hard, they have your trust at that point, because you've done all the work up to that point, that you can stand on the gas with them and you can push them, right? And they will do what you want. And also it comes down to too, Matt, you're a guy that's been through a lot in wrestling, worked your way up the ladder, made it to the Olympics. You won some hardware in the Olympics, which such a tiny percentage of the human population can say they've ever done. So, and MMA, you've gone through all of it. You've done the work. So it's a lot easier for an athlete to look at you as opposed to a guy who maybe really wasn't even ever a fighter, telling him, oh, no, you need to run that hill 12 times. And they look at you and go, well, you haven't ever done this. So the coaches that are physically capable, even if they've never done, run the hill with your athletes. And if they see you struggling and coughing and puking, you're putting in the work with them, right? You're putting in the work with them, no matter how hard it is, no matter how bad it sucks when you get home and not being able to walk, whatever it is. At least they go, you know what, man, my coach is putting in the work with us. He's doing the endurance training with us. He's doing all of it, jumping through the hoops with us. He's sacrificing, and that builds trust also.
I think
that's such a good answer, Pat. Honestly, that helps. And you know what? I'm going to take that piece that you said, is make a game plan to beat you, and I think that would help us figure out how to help our athletes get to that next level, is building that game plan on how to. And you know what, I've never thought of it from that perspective before. And I've game planned a lot of fights, a lot of matches, and prepared. Right. But it was always about, how do I use my best assets against their best assets, and how do I avoid their strengths and work into my strengths. But really getting to know where you're weak, it shows you where you're weak. It shows you where you got to improve. And
that's the thing, it's like, I was never an upper body wrestler. I had trouble with guys who were real good throwers, right? And kind of interesting, I'm fighting you one day and going, well, shit, this is gonna be a rough ride possibly. But the thing is I at least tried to work on that stuff and get better at it, and go with people that, Steve Rusk. You remember Steve Rusk from my gym? He only fought 4 fights. They all lasted about 30 seconds. Probably the strongest pound for pound human being I'd ever seen in my life or felt in my life. And that was a guy who would go in and deliberately play the part of the athlete that the guy was fighting. And he was a good enough athlete to do it, whether it was striking or wrestling or grappling or whatever, and just dismantle people. So, that's the thing, is you've got to be able to be versatile enough to almost become a different fighter or a different athlete with a different style. You have to have the mindset to be able to do that, to be that versatile. And so those, but as far as thinking in different layers, when you have to think in deeper layers, everything that I think of, whether it's business, politics, sports, training, anything, most people only see the surface of what's going on. So that game planning, how to beat one person, instead of game planning based on his strengths and what his coaches and what he are putting together to beat you. I ask athletes when we do interviews no matter what network it is I've worked for, we always obviously do interviews with the athletes that are fighting, to find out what's your game plan? What's this? And every once in a while, to throw people a curveball, I'll say, what is your opponent's game plan to beat you? And they just kind of tilt their head sideways like a puppy, like, oh shit, I didn't think of that. And that gets them to start thinking, and MMA is such a complex, wrestling alone is such a complex sport. There's so many techniques, so many ways to get beat. Then you throw in MMA with the striking, the kickboxing, the boxing, the wrestling, the submission grappling. There's so many ways to get beat that as you get more and more experience, you start to realize how many things there are in another guy's arsenal that can beat you, right? And that's when that's when you can get completely mind screwed and start fighting real safe. Oh man, I got to fight not to lose, this and that. So it's very complex stuff. It's a thinking man's sport, just as wrestling is, right?
One of the things we were talking about earlier too is this idea, going back to the idea of mentoring and helping guys develop at any level. And one of the things I tell the kids that I work with in school is that if they're looking for mentoring or they're looking for coaching, that's a two-way street, and that they have to not expect someone to take them under their wing, that they need to go seek those mentors out. And those mentors can be from coaches, they can be business people, friends, but that there's a certain level of initiative that needs to be taken to go find those coaches and tell them that this is what I'm looking for, or to make those relationships become built on their part, because coaches can have a lot of duties. You guys are busy setting up fights and doing administrative stuff, and there's lots of hats that coaches are wearing when you're training guys, and sometimes you overlook that
Sure.
athletes might be needing something or needing mentoring or looking for it, because some guys don't want it either. They think that they're okay on their own.
Right.
Is there something that you've seen or experienced, or a message that you would give guys about strategies for seeking that mentoring out? How do you get a coach's attention? How do you let them know what you need? How do you find different places where mentoring can come from to get what you need as an athlete?
Yeah, again, it's back to just having that open channel and expressing yourself clearly. A lot of times coaches can get lost in, they've got 40, 50 athletes, whatever it is, and they're just trying to, give everybody the fundamentals and this and that. But, for those athletes that really are truly invested in their future and becoming the best at what they're doing, yeah, you got to be honest with your coach, and you got to say, hey, listen, if I'm doing something wrong, please tell me, right? And it also comes down to personalities, like I said, and being able to bend a little bit, right? Because there are coaches that have certain styles that don't mesh with certain kids. But if you open a channel of dialogue and try to open up just a crack in the door with each other, a lot of times that can blossom into one hell of a relationship. And for coaches out there, that have assistant coaches, for kids that are tough to get through to, the head coach has to assume the bad guy role. He just has to. He has to be a guy that is truly disliked by that athlete. That athlete has to dislike him because he's the one that yells at the kid. And then the assistant coach is the one that says, and I'll give you a perfect example because I was played perfectly by my high school wrestling coach. The head coach, one day, I was sick as a dog, and I probably shouldn't have been in wrestling practice, but I was just getting my ass kicked, and my face was getting ground in the mat, and I was just dogging it. I was sick. And my head wrestling coach, Frank Freeman, who's a legend in Iowa high school sports, yelled at me from across the room. The whole room stopped. And this was one of those defining moments in my life, actually. And he said, screamed as loud as he could, Miletich. And the whole room stopped wrestling. And he said, if you don't do it now, you will always be a loser the rest of your life. And it just, wow. You talk about lighting a fire. I mean, I was mad. I was mad at him. How dare you scream at me? I've probably got the flu. I'm dying over here. I'm still here. I'm doing my best. but I sucked it up, and I got through the practice, and I started doing better just based on him screaming at me. But after the practice, Coach Castro came up to me, put his arm around me, and said, "Hey, man," he goes, "let's walk over here. Let's work on some armbar series, and let's work on your pinning combinations a little bit, and let me help you out with that," in a real gentle, comforting voice. And that's the way those guys played me, back and forth, that good cop, bad cop. So coaches have to be creative, and the head coach has to be willing to take the bullets. The head coach has to be he has to understand, because when I look back on that as a 50-year-old guy, I say to myself, they were geniuses. They were geniuses. Absolute. They played me perfect because they knew my personality, and they knew how to get the most out of me at the time. And so that falls on coaches. We're supposed to be the wise, experienced people, right? So that good cop, bad cop thing is, for anybody out there that's having trouble with athletes, it's a good conversation to have with your assistant coach, and talk about it, how to find those athletes and help them.
Well, I'm definitely trying to get some wisdom, and it's helping by bringing guys like you on, Pat. And thank you so much for taking the time. It was great to catch up with you and get you on our call. Really appreciate you, brother.
Thank you, Matt. Been an honor, buddy. You guys be well, all right?
All right. Thank you, man.